The road stretched endlessly ahead, a thin gray ribbon cutting through frozen fields. Snow clung to the edges of the asphalt, dirty and tired, just like the silence inside our car. My wife, Emily, sat next to me, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the window, as if there was something out there more interesting than me. Our son, Noah, hummed softly in the back seat, tapping his fingers against the glass. He was excited. I could feel it in his voice when he asked, "Are we almost there, Dad?" I smiled at him through the rearview mirror. "Almost, buddy. Just a little more." He nodded, satisfied, then turned his gaze back to the blur of snowy houses passing by. Emily didn't answer. She hadn't said a word in the last 20 minutes. I wanted to ask her what was wrong, but I already knew. Her silence wasn't new. It had become part of our drives, part of our home. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "You okay?" I asked quietly. "I'm fine," she said, still not looking at me. The way she said it, flat and automatic, told me she wasn't fine at all. I didn't push, not today. I could feel the weight of what was waiting for us. The same house, the same dinner table, the same eyes watching every move I made. Emily's mother, Martha, had that kind of stare that could slice through skin. She'd never liked me, not once. From the first time we met, I could sense it. The polite smile, the careful words, the way she called me the practical one. That's how she said it, like practicality was a curse. The car heater hummed softly. Noah started talking about Christmas presents, his voice light and innocent. "Grandma said she has a big surprise for me." Emily smiled faintly, almost despite herself. "I'm sure she does, honey." I glanced at her. "You think it'll be another box of books she picked from the church sale?" Emily shot me a look that told me not to start. I bit my tongue. It wasn't the time for jokes, not when every word could turn into a spark. We turned onto the narrow road that led to her mother's neighborhood. The houses here were big, tidy, identical, like they'd been copied and pasted. I remembered the first Christmas I'd spent there, 10 years ago. Martha had greeted me with a hug that felt more like a test, tight, assessing, perfumed with disapproval. She'd whispered, "Take care of my daughter," in a tone that didn't sound like trust, but like a threat. I did take care of her. I worked, I provided, I tried. But in Martha's eyes, I never reached the bar. Emily shifted slightly, her hands fidgeting with the scarf on her lap. "Can we please just try to have a nice evening?" she said, softly. "For Noah?" "I'll be on my best behavior," I said, forcing a smile. "Like every year." She sighed, the kind of sigh that meant she didn't believe me. The snow started falling again. Slow, thick flakes that caught the light of the street lamps. It looked peaceful outside, but inside the car, the air felt heavy. My mind wandered to the past, to the sharp words Martha once threw at me during dinner, to the way Emily defended her instead of me, and how small I felt in that house. I told myself it was different now, that I was older, calmer, but the truth was, every time I went there, I turned into a stranger in my own life. We pulled into the driveway. The house looked exactly as I remembered. Too perfect. Too clean, glowing with fake warmth from the lights strung along the porch. The front door opened before I could even turn off the engine. Martha stood there, wrapped in a red cardigan, smiling, that smile she used when people were watching. "You made it," she called out, her voice sweet but sharp. Emily smiled automatically, stepping out before I could open her door. Noah ran ahead, laughing, his boots crunching on the snow. "Grandma!" he shouted. Martha bent down, her arms wide, her eyes bright only for him. "There's my favorite boy," she said. I watched the way she looked at him, then at me. The smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did. I walked up the path, the cold biting at my face. "Merry Christmas, Martha," I said, forcing my tone steady. "Merry Christmas," she replied, and her eyes slid over me, quick, evaluating, like she was checking for cracks. Inside, the warmth hit me instantly, thick with the smell of cinnamon and pine. Everything was arranged perfectly. The table set, the lights dimmed just right, the radio whispered old carols. For a moment, I almost felt like a guest in a photograph. "Take off your coat," she said, already turning away. "Dinner's almost ready." Emily followed her into the kitchen. I stood there, holding the coats, watching Noah as he touched the ornaments on the tree, his small fingers brushing the fragile glass. He looked happy. I wanted to hold on to that moment, to believe this Christmas could be different, but something inside me knew better. Martha's voice drifted from the kitchen, low and clipped, saying something I couldn't quite make out. Emily answered, just as quietly, then silence. The kind that isn't peaceful, but waiting. I glanced toward the doorway, feeling that familiar pressure build in my chest. The air smelled sweet, but underneath, there was something else. Something sour, like resentment covered in sugar. I took a deep breath, trying to shake it off. Maybe I was just imagining it. Maybe this year would be fine. But as Martha walked back into the room, her eyes briefly met mine, and in that split second I knew whatever peace we had was already cracking.
The next morning started with the sound of Martha's voice echoing from the kitchen, bright and sharp like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. "Coffee's ready," she called, and I could already hear the undertone, the kind of cheerfulness that made you feel guilty for noticing how forced it was. Emily was beside me, still half asleep, her hair tangled on the pillow. "You should probably go," she murmured, before she starts calling again. I got up, rubbed my face, and told myself to breathe. It was Christmas Eve, after all. I wanted to keep the peace, at least for Noah. When I walked into the kitchen, Martha was standing by the counter, her back straight, wearing an apron that said, "Bless this home." The irony didn't miss me. "Morning," I said. She turned with that polished smile. "Oh, good, you're up. I wasn't sure you liked early mornings." "I do," I replied, "when I'm not being woken by someone shouting about coffee." Her smile didn't move, but her eyes flicked, quick and cold. "Just trying to make everyone feel welcome," she said. "You know how Emily likes her mornings calm." I poured myself a cup, feeling her daze on my back. "Where's Noah?" I asked. "Outside," she said. "I told him he could help me with the snow later. He's such a good boy. So different from—" She stopped mid-sentence, took a slow sip of her own coffee, and looked away. "Different from what?" I asked. "Different from most children," she said lightly. But the pause was too deliberate. It hung in the air like smoke. Emily came in then, smiling sleepily. "Morning, Mom. Morning, honey." She kissed my cheek and went straight for the coffee. Martha's eyes softened instantly. "You should let him rest, dear," she said to Emily. "He looks tired." "I'm fine," I said, maybe too quickly. "Just not used to your hospitality." Emily gave me a small warning glance. "Don't start," her eyes seemed to say. So I didn't. I sat at the table, listening to the sound of Martha moving around the kitchen. Every motion was precise, controlled like a performance. She commented on everything, how I folded the napkins wrong, how the ornaments were uneven, how I hadn't shoveled the porch like a real man would. Each jab was small, harmless on its own, but together they worked their way under my skin. By noon, the house smelled of cinnamon and roasted turkey. Noah was running around with a paper Santa hat, laughing, and I tried to focus on that, on his joy, not the tension sitting behind every smile. At one point, Martha handed me a box of lights. "Would you mind fixing these?" she asked sweetly. You're good with tools, aren't you? Sure, I said. What's wrong with them? They don't work, she said, handing them over. Kind of like that bookshelf you built last year. Emily froze for half a second, pretending not to hear. I smiled tightly. Yeah, I guess I'm still learning. Some men never learn, she said softly, almost to herself, but loud enough for me to catch it. The line hit harder than I wanted to admit. I kept my hands busy with the lights, pretending not to care. I told myself she was just being herself, mean, controlling, bitter. But the truth was, every word landed exactly where she wanted it to. Around 3, Emily and Martha started cooking dinner together. I heard laughter, the kind that wasn't quite real, and the rhythm of their voices felt off, like a song missing its last note. I stayed in the living room, helping Noah build a small Lego car. "Grandma's nice," he said suddenly. "She said you used to be funny when you met Mom." I looked at him, startled. "She said that?" He nodded. "She said you changed. But people change when they get older, right?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, buddy. Sometimes they do." He went back to his toys, humming, oblivious. My chest tightened. It wasn't just about me anymore. She was planting seeds in his head, too. By the time dinner was ready, my nerves were thin as thread. The table looked perfect. Candles, polished silverware, napkins folded into little Christmas trees. Martha was in her element. She served everyone with exaggerated care, making sure Emily's plate looked the best. She turned to me and said, "I made your favorite pie, sweetheart." Then she turned to me. "I wasn't sure what you liked, so I just guessed." "I know," I said with a smile that meant the opposite. Throughout dinner, her comments kept coming, wrapped in sugar. "So, work must be stressful for you," she said. "Emily tells me you've been struggling to keep up lately?" "That's not exactly what I said," Emily interrupted quickly. But the damage was done. Martha tilted her head. "Oh, I must have misunderstood. I'm getting old, you know." Noah giggled. "You're not old, Grandma." She laughed, loud and triumphant. "Oh, aren't you sweet?" Her eyes flashed towards me, victorious. I felt something twist inside me, a mix of anger and shame. I swallowed it, all of it, because that's what I always did. Later, as I stood by the sink, helping with dishes, Martha came beside me. "You know, family harmony is delicate. It takes a certain kind of man to keep it intact." I didn't look at her. "Guess I'm still learning that too." "Maybe, but I do hope you learn fast, for Emily's sake, and Noah's." Her tone was gentle, but the message was a blade. When I finally went upstairs that night, Noah was already asleep, Emily brushing her hair by the mirror. I looked at her reflection. "Does she always have to do that?" "Do what?" she asked, though she knew. "That thing where every sentence is a test?" Emily sighed. "She just wants the best for us." "No," I said quietly. "She wants control." She turned to me, eyes tired. "Please, don't make this Christmas another fight." I nodded because I couldn't promise otherwise. But inside, I knew something had shifted. Martha had pushed too far, and I could feel the cracks starting to widen. The morning was loud with laughter that didn't sound real. Emily tried to keep things cheerful, turning on Christmas music and asking her mother to help frost the cookies, but everything felt rehearsed, like a play we were all forced to perform. I sat on the carpet with Ethan, trying to build a small plastic train track that refused to connect. He giggled every time the bridge collapsed. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Then her voice cut through the room. "Careful, Ethan, don't make a mess on the rug," she said sharply. The boy froze mid-laugh, looking at me as if asking whether he'd done something wrong. "It's fine," I said softly. "We'll clean up later." She didn't respond. Just that cold, pinched smile, the one that meant she'd filed the moment away for later use. The air in that house always felt dense, heavy, with things unsaid. Every sound seemed too loud, every silence too long. Emily moved around us, tidying things that didn't need tidying. The smell of cinnamon and burnt sugar filled the room. "Lunch is almost ready," her mother said finally. "I hope everyone can manage to sit at the table like civilized people today." I looked up, unsure if that was meant for me or my son. Probably both. During lunch, she talked endlessly about her garden, her neighbors, about how some men just aren't naturally domestic. Emily laughed politely, eyes darting toward me. I pretended to listen. I cut Ethan's food into small pieces, focusing on the motion of the knife, the rhythm of cutting, anything to stay calm. Afterward, we gathered by the tree again. Ethan ran around, excited, sugar drunk from too many cookies. "Grandma, can I have another?" he asked, holding up the empty plate. "No, sweetheart," she said with exaggerated sweetness. "You've had enough. Your daddy doesn't want you to get sick." "That's not what I said," I began, but she was already turning away. Ethan's face crumpled. He reached toward the cookie tin on the counter, just one small hand, quick and innocent. And then it happened. A sharp crack of sound, unreal in its suddenness. Her hand struck his wrist. "I said no," she snapped. The room froze. Ethan stared at her, wide-eyed, tears already forming. The silence that followed was unbearable. My heart slammed against my ribs. Emily gasped, dropping the dish she was holding. It shattered, pieces scattering across the floor. "Mom," she whispered, "what are you doing?" "Teaching him manners," her mother said calmly, as if nothing had happened. "Children need boundaries. You spoil him." I felt something inside me snap. Not loud, but definite, like ice cracking underfoot. "You don't touch him," I said quietly. My voice didn't sound like my own. "Excuse me," she said, narrowing her eyes. "You heard me." The air trembled. Emily's hand found my arm, trembling. "Please," she whispered, "not now." "Not now?" I repeated. "When then?" "He's just a child. You don't get to—" "Don't you dare raise your voice in my house," she interrupted, her tone sharp as glass. "Maybe if you disciplined him once in a while, I wouldn't have to." I stepped forward before I knew I had moved. Not to strike, not to threaten. Just to stand between her and my son. She flinched anyway, taking a small step back. "You need to leave," she said after a moment, quieter now. "If you're going to behave like this, you can pack your things and go." Emily's face was pale, her mouth opening and closing without sound. "Mom, please," she murmured. "Stop." But no one moved. The Christmas lights flickered behind us, tiny points of red and gold reflected in the shards of broken glass on the floor. The music still played faintly in the background, some cheerful carol that felt cruelly out of place. I knelt beside Ethan, taking his hand gently. "It's okay," I whispered, though I didn't believe it. His small fingers were trembling. A faint red mark bloomed across his wrist. I kissed it without thinking. The taste of salt and fear filled my mouth. Emily crouched beside us, her eyes wet. "I didn't mean for this," she whispered. "I know, but I didn't know what that meant anymore." Behind us, her mother stood perfectly still, her expression calm, almost victorious. "You see," she said softly, "this is exactly what I was talking about." I looked at her then. Really looked. The perfect hair, the careful lipstick, the smile that never reached her eyes, and I realized she wanted this. The chaos, the fracture, the proof that she was right about me all along. I gathered Ethan into my arms. He buried his face in my shoulder, shaking. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. "We're going upstairs," I said. "Stay out of our way." I didn't wait for her answer. As we climbed the stairs, each step creaked underfoot, the sound echoing like distant thunder. I didn't look back, but I could feel her watching us, smiling that small, satisfied smile. And in that moment, I knew the holiday was over, even if the day wasn't. I carried Ethan upstairs, his small body trembling against mine. The tears had soaked his shirt and I could feel his tiny heart racing in panic. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered, closing the bedroom door behind us. The lock clicked, and for a moment the world outside, the house, the music, the laughter, felt distant, unreal. He buried his face in my shoulder, shaking, and I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me, heavier than any snow outside. "Dad, she hit me," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. I held him tighter, trying to swallow back a mixture of rage and shame. "I know, Ethan. I know." I could feel my hands shaking, not from cold, but from helplessness. I set him down on the bed and sat beside him, brushing the hair from his face. "You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you here." He nodded, his tears still falling, and I wiped them away with my sleeve. Every instinct in me screamed to storm downstairs, to yell, to make her see the damage she'd caused. But I stayed silent, because I knew it wouldn't help. Not yet. Emily appeared at the door seconds later, her eyes wide, her mouth open as if she'd rehearsed what to say 1,000 times. I didn't know what to do," she whispered, stepping in cautiously. "I tried. I told her to stop, but—" She trailed off, her voice cracking. I looked at her, searching for a spark of alignment, a glimmer that she was finally on our side. "Emily," I said quietly, "we need to be honest with each other. Not with her, with us. What just happened? We can't pretend it didn't." She sank onto the edge of the bed beside me, wrapping her arms around her knees. "I know. I should have said more. I didn't want to make it worse." I nodded slowly, understanding the complexity, but anger simmered beneath my skin. "It's not about making it worse. It's about protecting him, about protecting ourselves. You can't just let her decide what's acceptable because she's Mom. She's not God." Emily bit her lip, tears glinting in her eyes. "I know, but I don't know how to fight her without starting a war that could destroy everything." I exhaled sharply, frustrated. Maybe it's already destroyed Emily. Maybe that war started the moment she raised her hand on him. Ethan stirred, sniffled, and climbed onto my lap, leaning against me for safety. "Daddy, I'm scared." "I know, buddy. I know," I said again, holding him closer. "But we're together. That's what matters." Emily reached out, placing a trembling hand on my shoulder. I don't want to choose sides," she said softly. "I never wanted to." "But you already have," I murmured, almost to myself. "Every time you stayed silent, every time you laughed at her little jabs, you chose her over us." Her lips trembled. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I am. I promise." I wanted to believe her, I really did, but the tension between us was palpable. We were on the same side physically, but emotionally, the rift had begun. We sat in silence for what felt like hours, listening to the muffled sounds of Martha downstairs, moving as if nothing had happened. Every creak of the floorboards, every laugh, every sound of dishes being set down was a reminder that she was still orchestrating her control, that her power in this house hadn't been diminished. Martha yawned, exhausted from crying, and I carried him to his small bed. I tucked the blanket around him, brushing his hair back from his damp forehead. "Sleep, buddy. Daddy's here. Nothing can hurt you while I'm here," I whispered. Emily lingered in the doorway, watching me, her eyes reflecting fear and guilt. "We can't keep doing this," I said, finally. my voice low and steady. "Hiding upstairs every time she loses control. We need to decide how far are we willing to let her go." She nodded, swallowing hard. "I know. I don't have answers yet." We stayed in that room, listening to the distant hum of the house, the ticking of the clock, the faint Christmas music that felt cruelly cheerful. Outside, snow began to fall again, thick and relentless. Inside, I felt something shift. The innocence of the morning, the false joy of the cookies and laughter was gone. In its place was a tension that could snap at any moment, a quiet storm waiting to erupt. And as I looked at Emily, and then at Ethan, I realized that nothing would ever feel the same again. The house that had seemed warm and welcoming now felt like a cage, each wall a witness to what had happened, each shadow a reminder of the power she held over us. We had survived the first strike, but the war, the real war, was just beginning. The living room felt impossibly small that evening, crowded with all the trappings of a perfect Christmas. The twinkling lights, the neatly wrapped presents, the smell of roasted turkey. But beneath it all, the tension was thick, almost visible. I set the last plate on the table and took a deep breath, my hands trembling slightly. Emily was beside me, her eyes wary, and Ethan sat in his high chair, too small to understand everything, yet painfully aware that something was wrong. Martha surveyed the room with her usual composed smile, pouring gravy with an exaggerated flourish. "I thought we could all enjoy a quiet dinner together," she said, her tone like sugar with a bitter aftertaste. I stared at her, my stomach twisting. "Quiet?" That word felt like a lie. "Martha," I said, my voice firm, trying to steady it, "we need to talk." Her eyebrows arched. "Oh," she said lightly. "About what?" "About what happened with Ethan," I said, my eyes on hers. "About the way you treated him, and the way you've treated me for years in this house." The room went still. Even the faint crackle of the Christmas lights seemed to hush. Emily shifted in her chair, looking down at her lap, silent. Martha laughed softly, like a trickle of water in a dark room. "Treated you? You make it sound like I've done something wrong." "You hit him," I said, and the words felt heavier than I expected. "You struck my son, Martha, and you've spent years undermining me, putting him in the middle, twisting words, testing boundaries that aren't yours to test." She tilted her head, that practiced smile still in place, but there was a flicker in her eyes now. "I was teaching him discipline, and guiding you as a husband. You could take notes, you know." I felt heat rise in my chest. "No, you don't get to teach him anything that involves fear, and you don't get to control our family through manipulation." Ethan whimpered, sensing the rising voices, and I reached for his hand. Emily finally spoke, quietly but clearly. "Mum, please, can we not—" "No," I interrupted, cutting her off gently but firmly. "Not this time. Not after what just happened. He's our son, our family, and you've crossed a line we won't ignore anymore." The tension snapped like a taut string. Martha's smile faltered. "You dare speak to me like that in my own house?" she said, her voice sharp, trembling slightly for the first time. "This is your house too," I said, my voice rising but controlled. "It's ours when we're here, and you will not strike Ethan again. You will not speak to him or to me with that kind of authority." Emily glanced at me, her eyes wide, half fear, half relief. "He's right," she said softly. "We can't keep pretending it's okay." Martha's hands tightened around the edge of the table. "You think you can just walk in here and dictate how I behave? You think you're in charge of this family?" I leaned forward, matching her gaze. "No, but I am in charge of protecting my son. And if that means calling out your lies, your manipulation, your cruelty, then I will, every time." The room seemed to hold its breath. Ethan clutched my sleeve, looking up at me with wide, fearful eyes. "Daddy, I whispered, smoothing his hair. "It's okay. You're safe." Martha's jaw worked, her lips pressed together, as she processed that for the first time, perhaps realizing that control was slipping from her hands. She straightened, composing herself again, but the edge was gone from her posture. "I see," she said finally, her voice lower now, brittle. "You've decided to take a stand. Very well." I exhaled, feeling the tension in my chest loosen slightly, though the adrenaline still coursed through my veins. Emily reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "It's about time," she whispered. "We can't keep letting her do this." Martha didn't move, didn't speak for a long moment, and the silence was deafening. Then she finally turned, walking toward the hallway with a controlled calmness that barely masked the shock beneath. "Enjoy your dinner," she said lightly over her shoulder. The words sounded empty, and I realized she had lost this round, but the battle wasn't over. I sat back, exhausted, watching her disappear from view. Ethan pressed his tiny hand to my chest, his trust in me absolute. Emily exhaled slowly, leaning against me. "We did it," she said softly, though it didn't feel triumphant, more like a fragile truce had been reached. I nodded, holding my son close. "For now," I said. The house seemed quieter suddenly, the twinkle of the lights less cheerful and more honest, reflecting the truth that had finally been spoken. We ate the rest of the meal in silence, each bite heavy with unspoken acknowledgement. The war wasn't over, but a line had been drawn, and for the first time in years, I felt like we were on the side that mattered.
The living room glowed with the soft light of the Christmas tree, ornaments reflecting in every direction, casting tiny stars across the walls. For the first time that day, there was a quiet in the house that wasn't forced, that wasn't laced with tension, at least on the surface. Ethan ran ahead, his excitement momentarily outweighing the fear he had carried all day, and Emily followed, trying to keep him from knocking over the smaller decorations. Martha was sitting in the armchair by the window, a controlled smile plastered on her face, pretending that the earlier chaos had never occurred. I watched my son approach the tree, his small hands reaching for a delicate glass ornament at the very top. "Careful, buddy," I said, my voice calm but firm. He wobbled slightly on the tip of his toes, and the ornament slipped from his fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor with a sound that cut through the warm room like a knife. Ethan froze, eyes wide, heart racing, and for a moment, all I could hear was my own pulse. Martha gasped sharply, rising from her chair. "That's one of my grandmother's heirlooms," she exclaimed, voice sharp and accusatory. Her hands shook as she pointed at the broken pieces. The words formed in my mouth before I even realized I was speaking. "Martha, stop," I said quietly but with absolute authority. She froze, the room holding its breath. "No yelling, no blaming him. He is 8 years old and he is safe. You do not get to strike fear into him, and you do not get to manipulate this family anymore." The shift was immediate. Martha's face tightened, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the shock beneath. Emily's hand found mine, squeezing it gently, her eyes glistening with both fear and relief. I didn't know what to say," she whispered. "You're right," I murmured, holding her gaze. "We can't let her control us anymore." Ethan pressed his small body against my leg, still trembling from the loud noise and the earlier tension. I bent down and picked him up, holding him against my chest. "It's okay, buddy. You didn't break anything that matters more than you. You're safe. Mommy and Daddy are here." He buried his face in my shoulder, finally allowing a small laugh to escape, and I felt a weight lift that I didn't know I'd been carrying. Martha's eyes flickered between the broken ornament and my face. For a moment, she seemed poised to argue, to assert control, but then she stopped. The words wouldn't come. The power she had wielded all these years was gone, and she felt it. The room was still, the only sounds the faint crackle of the fireplace and Ethan's small breathing against me. I set him down beside the tree and helped him retrieve the tinsel he had thrown, arranging it around the broken ornament pieces with care. "See," I said softly, kneeling to his level, "we can fix this together. Nothing is ruined as long as we stick together." Emily smiled, a quiet, genuine expression for the first time that day. Martha sank back into her chair, silent, the earlier control dissolved into a fragile, brittle quiet. I looked at my family, Emily and Ethan, and for the first time I felt an unshakable sense of peace. The ornaments may have been shattered, but what mattered most was whole, our bond, our safety, our ability to face what had haunted us for so long. Outside, snow began to fall again, light and unrelenting, covering the world in white. Inside, the tree lights reflected in Ethan's wide, innocent eyes, and I realized that, despite the chaos, despite Martha's lingering presence, we had reclaimed this night, reclaimed our family. The holiday wasn't perfect, and the house wasn't free of tension entirely, but for the first time it felt ours. I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the room, the soft weight of my son leaning against me, and the quiet understanding with Emily. The ornaments could be replaced. The past could not be undone. But what we built tonight in this small living room, under the glow of the Christmas lights, was stronger than fear, stronger than control, stronger than anything Martha could ever impose. We had survived the storm she tried to bring into our home, and in that survival, we had found our victory.